Euaoi.
If it isn't already obvious, this is the color wheel. Going clockwise, you have the reds, then the oranges, the yellows, the greens, pretty straightforward. But once you move past the greens, it starts to get a little confusing. What do I mean by this? Well, let me explain. Let me start with the basics, that being the primary colors. And by primary colors, I don't mean the red, yellow, blue tricolor we've been taught when we were toddlers. Instead, what I'm going to be talking about are the three primary colors of light, red, green, and blue, and the three primary colors of pigment, cyan, magenta, and yellow. The RGB model is the additive model, because you create new colors by adding the lights together. While the Cyan model is the subtractive model, because the colored pigments or dyes subtract certain wavelengths of light. You could argue that magenta looks reddish and cyan looks bluish, which could explain the red, yellow, blue primary color model. But this is referred to as traditional color theory. Another thing to note about the two models is that the primary colors for one model are the secondary colors for the other model. What I mean by this is the secondary colors of the RGB model are cyan, magenta, and yellow, while the secondary colors of the CMY model, or CMYK model with K representing black, are red, green, and blue. And this brings up the first source of confusion I have with the color wheel past the greens. Why do we traditionally see cyan as a lighter shade of blue? Because if you look at the color wheel, you can see that cyan is an even mixture of blue and green. And before I continue, I could hear some of you saying, isn't teal an even mixture of blue and green? Well, as it turns out, teal is actually a darker shade of cyan. I know, pretty mind-blowing, right? And this can pretty much go back to my original question on why cyan is generally considered to be a shade of blue rather than its own color. Especially since cyan isn't one of the 7 colors in the rainbow, going by the acronym ROY-G-BIV, where instead of cyan, the 3 post-screen colors listed, or the BIV, are blue, indigo, and violet. Now this just leaves 2 answers. As for why the rainbow specifically refers to violet instead of purple, I'll get to that later. But as for why indigo ended up becoming one of the 7 colors, here's why. Back in the mid-17th century, when Sir Isaac Newton was proving that white light comprised a full spectrum of colors using prisms, Newton divided the colors of the prisms into the 7 colors of the rainbow that we know today. Newton added indigo as a color to the rainbow because he wanted the rainbow to have exactly 7 colors. Why he wanted the rainbow to have exactly 7 colors was because he believed 7 was a cosmically significant or even a magical number, such as how a musical scale has exactly 7 notes or how a week has exactly 7 days. And why he chose to add indigo in particular is because indigo was actually a major commodity at the time. And that's because indigo was probably the most famous of the natural dyes, with the dye being extracted from the leaves of plants in the genus Indigofera, which only grow in tropical climates. Due to it being only prevalent in tropical climates, the high demand for this dye fueled trade wars, propelled the slave trade, and partially financed the American Revolutionary War. Today, many color specialists actually advocate for removing indigo from the colors of the rainbow, reducing it to a simple red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. And in that case, why not just replace indigo with cyan? Especially since it's much easier to distinguish blue and cyan than it is blue and indigo. Now going back to the purple-violet difference, this leaves another question. What's the difference between purple and violet? Apparently, there's one pretty significant difference. Going back to the traditional 7 colors of the rainbow, it should be worth mentioning that violet is the very last color on the rainbow. And do you want to know why it's violet and not purple? Well, here's the main difference. Purple is not a spectral color. Because of that, purple and violet only look similar to humans, since most animals don't share the same receptor cones as humans. To humans, purple objects are red and blue at the same time, whereas violet objects are, well, just violet. And if violet is a spectral color, why do we describe colors as purple more often than we do violet? And the answer that I could find to that is apparently violet is a specific type of purple, so anything that can be described as violet can also be described as purple. That answer really doesn't make sense to me because purple, as mentioned earlier, is not a spectral color, and calling violet a shade of purple is implying that purple is both a spectral and non-spectral color. And going based on the popular line, roses are red, violets are blue, does that mean that violet is also a blue? Luckily, I have the answer for that. Violet is intently associated to violet. Makes perfect sense to me. Going back on topic, we only perceive purple as such since there is no wavelength of light for purple. Instead, we perceive it only when the short and long cones pick up a signal from pure red and pure blue light. In other words, our brain literally makes up the color purple. This is also evident from the fact that if you shape the color spectrum on a wheel, you get a bunch of colors in between violet and red that don't appear on a rainbow. Going more on the topic of non-spectral colors, these non-spectral colors stick out even more when looking at it through a chromacity diagram. The spectral colors correspond to pure wavelengths of light and wrap from the top and left ledges. On the bottom right diagonal, the line connecting the non-spectral colors is known as the line of purples. And they include colors like, well, purple, obviously, magenta, and rose. Now, since it's called the line of purples, does that mean purple and magenta are the same color? When trying to find this answer, I stumbled upon this discussion board post that had a rather puzzling way of saying it. All pinks are magenta, and all magentas are purple. But it does not mean that all purples are magenta, nor that all magentas are pink, let alone that all purples are pink. This person then proceeds to give a very long detailed response on why that's the case, and I left a link to this in the description in case you want to follow. But to sum up that response, the technical answer is that pink is a lightened form of magenta, and that magenta is but one type of purple. None of those colors occur in the prismatic splitting of white light. The hue is the same for both pink and magenta, only the saturation and value differ. So the hue is the same, but the saturation and value are smaller in magnitude. Now let's talk about complementary colors, which are colors that are opposite of each other on the color wheel. Going based on both the RGB model and the CMY model, the color opposite of magenta on the color wheel is green. Since green is generally considered to be a cool color, does that make magenta a warm color? When I looked up the answer, Google's AI response told me that magenta is a cool color with this article to back it up. But one other article I found lists magenta as a warm color. And I can hear some of you saying, well, magenta is in the line of purples, all magentas are purple, purple is a cool color, therefore magenta is a cool color. To which I say, if we're going by this discussion board response, then all pinks are magenta, which means pink is also a cool color? I had to look that up to find out because for the longest time, I always saw pink as a warm color, because pink is just a tint of red, and red's a warm color. And apparently, pink can be both warm or cool, depending on the shade. Now this is just getting really confusing. So to sum everything up, cyan is a color separate from blue despite popular belief. Indigo is a color between blue and purple that got its significance regarding the history of the plants needed to make the indigo pigment. Purple is a non-spectral color, meaning it has no wavelength, which makes it different from violet, which is a spectral color. Since the line of non-spectral colors are referred to as the line of purples, all magentas are technically purple, but not all purples are magenta. All pinks are magenta, but not all magentas are pink. And pink can be both a warm color and a cool color, depending on the shade. Now you start to see why the color wheel gets a little confusing once you start to go past green. Anyways, that's all I have for today, and I'll see you next time.